What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are hopping into our Week 9 must-start running backs for the 2022 fantasy football season. If you guys do enjoy today's content or find it helpful, be sure to hit that like button on the way in. Hit that subscribe button. Of course, if you're new to the channel, it really does help us out. If you guys hit that like and consider subscribing, and please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. All right, so here in Week 9, we've got Nick Chubb on bye week, both Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott on bye week, the Broncos' entire backfield on bye week, Saquon Barkley on bye week, Najee Harris on bye week, and CMC on bye week. So a lot of teams out there are going to be struggling at the running back position. You guys know that on a weekly basis, I usually do starts and sits for every matchup, but here in the midpoint of the season, I'm taking a little bit of a break, taking a little bit of a lighter approach to the schedule for the week. So I got my top 12 running backs moving into Week 9, then we'll hop into a couple of must start. So obviously any of the running backs on the screen today's video for my top 12 should be considered in your starting lineups, but we're going to go over a couple of running backs that I feel very strongly about moving into the week. But that does not mean that players like Austin Eckler or Derrick Henry are going to be benched in favor of the players we're going over in today's video. Please feel free, if you guys have questions about the running backs on your rosters, drop them in the comment section down below. I'll let you guys know who I like the most moving into Week 9. Overall, these are my top 12 running backs as we approach the week, and now let's hop into a couple must-start running backs for Week 9. All right, first on the list, we've got Travis Etienne facing the Raiders in Week 9, a phenomenal matchup for a running back who just had his best fantasy performance of the season in Week 8, with James Robinson being shipped off to the Jets. Etienne is going to continue to be in line for massive workloads. 25.2 fantasy points in Week 8 against the Broncos, 156 yards on the ground, a touchdown, and 3 receptions for Etienne. He is going to continue to see a ton of volume within this offense. I love this matchup against the Raiders. Etienne definitely moves up from a flex option to a very solid running back 2 on a weekly basis. In the last 4 weeks, he's had 12.8 or more fantasy points. I think this could be an even better performance in Week 9 against a Raiders defense that is absolutely struggling. On top of that, this Jaguars offense did not perform very well last week outside of the run game, so I think that moving into Week 9, they continue to make the run game the focal point of this offense. And even if they look elsewhere in terms of the passing game, Etienne has had enough involvement in the passing game that his fantasy value remains very high. So I can't emphasize enough, with Etienne taking over this backfield, he continues to be a must start on a weekly basis and as we approach Week 9. All right, Thursday Night Football, man, we got Miles Sanders versus the Houston Texans, the worst defense in the entire NFL against the running back position from a fantasy perspective. And overall, they've been awful against the run. Listen, guys, I really don't like Thursday night matchups. Things really tend to go out the window on these short weeks, but let's face it, the Eagles are going to have a good game. There's no doubt in my mind about it. And every now and then, Nick Sirianni really likes to make a statement with the run game. I do think this could be one of Miles Sanders' best stat lines overall, and I do believe that the Eagles will get up on the Texans early and just establish the run game and try to get as much clock off of the board as possible. So I think that Miles Sanders could be in line for a lot of volume. In the last 2 games of the season, he's had 13.8 or more fantasy points. Comes in as your RB18 on the season. I think that Sanders is due for a big game. I think that this matchup against the Texans is the perfect opportunity, the perfect game script, and the perfect defense for Miles Sanders to face to have a massive game. Don't forget, Derrick Henry just exploded for over 200 rushing yards against the Texans last week. Sanders should have a phenomenal day on the ground. Next up, we got Aaron Jones against the Detroit Lions. Listen, I know that a lot of rosters out there aren't going to think twice about having Aaron Jones in their starting lineups, but I've seen enough of your guys' rosters where Aaron Jones is an RB3, or maybe you have other options that you've acquired throughout the year, like a Donta Foreman, a Kenneth Walker, Dameon Pierce, whoever it may be, but you're contemplating, right? As we move into week 9, there's no reason that Aaron Jones should not be in your starting lineup. I know throughout the season he has brought some inconsistency, brought some boomer bust potential to your roster, but he still comes in as your RB9 as we move into week 9. He's coming off of 2 very solid performances, 19.7 fantasy points against the Buffalo Bills in week 8, 28.6 fantasy points against the Washington Commanders in week 7. The Detroit Lions have been awful against the run. They're one of the worst teams in the entire league against opposing running backs from a fantasy perspective. I just want to give you guys some confidence. You know, Aaron Jones being a part of the Packers offense, who's been not so great these past couple of weeks. You guys can have plenty of confidence with Aaron Jones squaring up against the Detroit Lions here in week 9. Next up, we've got Ramondre Stevenson versus the Indianapolis Colts. Listen, the Colts have played well against the run at times in the season, but overall, they're not the best run defense out there. And listen, I've gotten a lot of questions over the last couple of weeks about Ramondre Stevenson. You know, should I start him? Should I bench him? Should I trade him? And I've just encouraged you guys to hold on to Ramondre Stevenson and keep him in your lineups. Guys, since week 3, he's had 12.9 or more fantasy points, and in 5 of the last 6 matchups, right in that same stretch, he's had 19.5 or more fantasy points with a ceiling of 25.1 fantasy points. I'm not worried about Damian Harris coming back a little bit more healthy this week. I'm just not worried. Ramondre Stevenson is a must-start player for me on a weekly basis. It's a pretty good matchup overall. Stevenson should continue to bring high production on a week-in, week-out basis. I love him here in week 9. I think he is a must-start running back. All right, call me crazy. I've got Antonio Gibson on the list for week 9, 16.7 fantasy points in week 7, 20.7 in week 8, and he truly looked like, I would say, the lead back in week 8 against the Colts. Listen, Brian Robinson had 8 touches on the ground, no involvement in the passing game. Antonio Gibson had 7 touches on the ground, 1 less than Brian Robinson, I get it, but all the involvement in the passing game, 7 targets, 7 receptions overall, 58 receiving yards and a touchdown. He now has a receiving touchdown in his last 2 games. I think Antonio Gibson is the running back to roll with for the Washington Commanders, and the Minnesota Vikings run defense has been very poor all season long. This should be a good game script between these two teams. I think that Antonio Gibson is a very solid flex play, and in a week where we're missing a lot of running backs, a good enough RB2 to get you through week 9. And last, we're going to talk about 2 backfields that I like a lot due to their matchups, but 2 backfields that are very confusing. So if you're in need of a desperate stream, or if you own any of the Falcons or Cardinals running backs, I do think they should be considered in week 9. Let's start with the Falcons, right? You've got Cordero Patterson coming back to this backfield after missing the last 4 weeks. Then you got Tyler Algier, who had 17.5 fantasy points last week. Then you got Caleb Huntley, who had 91 yards on the ground last week, all mixed together. So listen, Patterson's more than likely going to play. There's a very small possibility he does not play in week 9, which would help Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley's overall output. But at the end of the day, the Chargers are in the bottom 5 against the running back position. So I do think there's some value to Tyler Algier, Caleb Huntley, and or Cordero Patterson. If I had to take a guess, Cordero Patterson will have a good day in his return, especially in PPR leagues. And I think Tyler Algier is going to be the back to ride with in this backfield. But there's definitely, some concern with starting any of them until we see what happens. But I'm telling you guys, the Chargers' run defense is that bad that probably 2 of these running backs are going to come out of this game with double digits. I'd be lying if I told you guys I knew who it's going to be. I think Algier and Patterson have the best opportunities, like I said, but Huntley looked really good on the ground last week as well. So listen, Falcons running backs, a great matchup this week. You're taking a gamble with starting any of them, but I do think that they are all worth consideration as we move into week 9. On the other hand, we got the Cardinals backfield in a really good matchup as well, going up against the Seattle Seahawks, but they're a little bit confusing because James Conner should be returning from a rib injury this weekend. And on the other hand, we got Darrell Williams heading to injured reserve, so he's not necessarily a factor, but Benjamin has been the lead back for the Cardinals while Connor and Williams have missed time. I do think if Connor comes back this weekend, he's going to definitely take some of that volume. And Benjamin's a really interesting back, right? 14.3 fantasy points in week 5 against Philadelphia, a very good run defense. 9.5 against Seattle, who they play this week, and week 6, an awful run defense. 23.3 in week 7 against the Saints, a decent run defense. Then 8.5 in week 8 against Minnesota, a bad run defense. So Benjamin tends to play well against decent or good run defenses and poorly against bad run defenses. But the point being, Benjamin and or James Conner should be considered as we move into week 9 because Seattle's run defense has been awful all season long. So we definitely want to try to exploit this matchup, but similar to the Falcons running backs, it's just a little bit of a risk depending on who's injured and who's not. If Conner doesn't play, then Benjamin is a solid play. But if Conner plays, you're definitely taking a little bit of risk in terms of the volume for both running backs, but they should absolutely be considered in the flex as we approach week 9. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button, of course, if you're new to the channel. It really does help us out when you guys hit that like and consider subscribing. And please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. Like I said, on a weekly basis, I usually do starts and sits for every matchup, for every team. But here at the midpoint in the season, I'm just taking a little bit of a lighter approach to the schedule as I was feeling a little bit burnt out last week. So I've got my top 12 running backs here for you guys. I've got some players that I think should be must starts overall and some matchups we want to take a look at. So let me know if you guys have more questions in terms of the running backs on your teams. I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And please feel free to reach out about any other positions, any other questions, concerns pertaining to the season. I'll get back to you when I can. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.